All right. Now, we already talked about the election of 1952. Who won the election of 1952? And why might this have some conforming type of influence also? Who won in 52, Hunter?
Eisenhower.
Eisenhower. What is it about Eisenhower that's going to promote maybe conformity or suggest that we shouldn't question status quo stuff? Okay, so he's got Richard Nixon as kind of his anti-communist watchdog, right? So he's got that taken care of. Tell me about what we know about Eisenhower domestically. Is he ultra-conservative? Or is he moderate? Or is he a liberal?
He's kind of moderate.
He's moderate, and that's kind of conforming too, right? Don't sway the boat too much. So we're moderate. We've got our anti-communist guy. What else is about Eisenhower that we can trust?
He's a
It's a war hero. It's like the grandfather of the army. I mean, all the armed forces members are just like, yeah, sweet boss.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So many people had fought this war, and this is the guy. Now, from that perspective, who's he kind of remind you of? Is there a former war hero who led a certain giant amount of people in war that he kept getting voted into office? Oh, this president. Eisenhower was a pretty good president. This guy was not a good president. Yeah, Grant, right? Because everyone had fought in the Civil War too, and he was the main general by the end for the Union. So Eisenhower, though, you can be trusted, right? He's had this before. He's older. He's our guy. He's pretty moderate. You've got Dick Nixon as our anti-communist guy. This is a safer choice. What's not a safe choice is an academic liberal governor, right? That's not as safe of a choice. So Adlai Stevenson didn't win. I like, even his name, Ike, it's so clean, right? So crisp. I had a kid one time, sat right there in AP, a long time ago. The week before the AP exam, raised her hand and said, I keep reading about this Ike. Can you please tell me who Ike is? And we had already had 2 essays where Eisenhower was featured pretty heavily in it. We've done DBQs with Eisenhower and stuff, and she asked this, and I was like, never hit a child, never hit a child. Did not pass the AP exam.
Wonder why.
Learn who Ike is. She did get a 2. I don't know how she got a 2.
That's kind of terrible.
Alright, let's talk about Eisenhower's dynamic conservatism. And one part of his dynamic conservatism is creating the largest engineering project in the history of the world, the interstate highway system.
Is it still considered that?
It might actually be. I don't know that for a fact today. But since I don't know it, I have no information, I'm going to go ahead and say yes, definitively yes.
Alright.
I'm going to go ahead and just make up my history.
You are an adult, so you automatically are like.
That's a good point. What is it about federal interstates that are different than highways?
They're maintained by the federal government.
She says as she raises her voice again. No, I mean in terms of logistics. And you got, not only you guys drive, but there is a really main difference between an interstate and a highway when it comes.
Bigger.
Well, there are multi-lane highways, right?
Speed limit's different.
Speed limit's different sometimes.
I don't know.
There's no stopping. Thank you. There's no stoplights, right? You just keep on trucking. Do what? Really? Federal Highway 127 out here, there are no stoplights?
In my mind, the highway is the worst parkway.
That's a parkway. The interstate, the parkways are like an interstate. The interstate system, there is no stopping. It's get on, get off, right? In big cities now they have freeways and expressways like this. But what this allows, it opens up everything. The interstate highway system, first of all, it was created, the main reason was for defense. How many of you have been on the interstate before and you've seen a bunch of army trucks, get past? The rationale, how Eisenhower got through Congress, one of the ways was to convince Congress, that was the only way, but one of the ways, well, this was for defensive purposes. It connected our military bases in times of stress. This would come in handy. But also, while the military wasn't using it, which is 99.9999% of the time, or pretty much 100% of the time, it can be used by civilians to travel faster, and it will connect big cities. And in connecting big cities, you can move out of the city quicker. Think about what the Interstate Highway Act did for suburbs, right? I mean, before this, you had to live pretty close to your job. Raise your hand if your parents work outside of Lawrenceburg. There you go. Because of Interstate Highway Act, people start living a little bit further away. Now, many of you parents might not take an interstate somewhere, but the idea of traveling to work longer distances becomes part of the American culture. And that's part of it. The suburbs obviously grew 6 times faster than any other part of the country. It became more segregated. The areas, the suburban areas, are they cheaper or more expensive to build a house than cities?
Cheaper.
Way cheaper, right? Land is cheaper in areas the further you go. So, the interstate highway system also, if you're living a little bit far away from the town, or you're living in a suburb, now you have to have 2 cars. What is the Interstate Highway Act going to do to automobiles?
Skyrocket their sales.
Yeah, you're going to start seeing America become a car culture. We are a car culture in America. We have several cultures. One of them is gun. One of them is car. At Falling Springs 2 days ago, there was a guy whose license plate was 2 Amendment. And a Second Amendment license plate. Like it wasn't like one you buy at a Stuckey's or a weird gas station. Literally, that was his license plate.
There was a truck during the summer that had all these like anti-zombie, gun control stuff. It was weird.
Okay.
It was really creepy.
Yes.
Was it Eisenhower or somebody else that said that during a nuclear attack that you could use the highways to get away, like civilians couldn't go through?
Well, I mean, what's one of the reasons why? We watched Duck and Cover today. Do you think that our government really thought that if a nuclear bomb went off, 45 feet from you or 500 yards from you, that people were going to really survive?
No.
No. So why do we do this?
I feel like it kind of
To
helps people
brainwash
on the very perimeters.
That's not why they did it.
But more importantly, it's just...
Exactly. You're going to make Americans feel like, A, the government's in charge. They got this, right? And B, you don't need to fear a nuclear bomb as much as you think you do. And if you don't fear a nuclear bomb, what are you more likely to advocate?
Anti-communism.
Well, aggressive foreign policy, right? If you knew what a nuclear bomb could really do, like the guy who survived 2 of them, right? You're going to be anti-nuclear weapon. But if you don't really know, and you're told that you can, there's a good chance of survival if you, duck and cover, then you're likely to take a different political stance, right? It is about power. It's about creating fear or the lack of fear to create power. The interstate highway system, think about this. This is a Republican president, and this cost in 1954, it cost $27 billion. You know what that would be today? It would be hundreds of billions of dollars. This is the largest government program. This was way bigger than the New Deal. This one thing cost more than the entire New Deal did. The federal government did most of this. What industry is really going to suffer because of the interstate highway system?
Railroads.
Railroad systems, right? Railroad systems are going to suffer, and they're going to become much less important in terms of moving people. Now, they're important for moving freight, but the railroad systems become much less important, and the interstate highway system radically changes the way our culture and we travel. We start getting things like, why would McDonald's come around during the interstate highway system? Because of it. It's quick, and that's part of it, but also think about this. Because the interstate highway system, won't Americans travel more? Right? It becomes cheaper to travel. And as you travel more, and you're in the era of conformity, people want the same thing at home when they go somewhere else. How many times have you been on vacation and you end up going to a restaurant that's just like the one at your house? Right? Andrew's like, that's what you're supposed to do. You are a chain restaurant guy, aren't you?
Sort of.
Okay. He's like, yes, there are times when I run in a chain restaurant. It's called my little kitchen. But conformity is not just going to be about, if your next door neighbor has a TV, you have to have a TV, but it's also like, we want all of our restaurants to be the same, our hotels to be the same, all of it to be the same. Okay, let's talk about balancing the federal budget. No, let's talk about labor unions. Labor unions. there are two labor unions that were really big. The AFL, which is the American Federation of Labor, which was a skilled labor union. And the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, was a non-skilled labor union. It was a big, giant, much more liberal union. The AFL was a pretty conservative union by that. The CIO was like a Mary/Duncan type of union, like a reform the system type of union.
Like,
They're not like the Wobleys. They're not like the IWW, who are literally communists or socialists. But these are some pretty progressive people who are calling for social change. These two unions actually combine. Today, it's the AFL-CIO. And they're doing this because during the era of anti-communism, it's also going to have some anti-union effects, right? Not as much as after World War I, but it's still there. And they expelled a labor union called the Teamsters. You ever heard of the Teamsters before?
Yeah.
The Teamster Union is a really big deal. They're still around. And does anyone know who the head of the Teamsters was forever? He's really famous. Jimmy Hoffa. Have you heard that name before, Trinity? Jimmy Hoffa? Jimmy Hoffa, why was he famous? Well, first of all, he's presumed dead because they think the mafia murdered him. He had big-time ties to the mafia. Remember when I talked about how the mafia helped build Vegas? Well, it was the Teamsters Union's pension plan they were using. If you want to see an awesome movie, Jack Nicholson played Jimmy Hoffa in the movie called Hoffa. And it was pretty cool. Danny DeVito played his right-hand man, like his Joe Pesci type, and it was really good. And he becomes really, really powerful. But what happens with Hoffa and what happens to these guys is that when you strike and the company brings in their own workers, what do? You beat them. You take iron poles, you take whatever you can do, and there's going to be a showdown. Hoffa was a blue-collar, I'm going to deal with you if you get in my way type. And he was seen as being hard to control, having union ties, and what essentially he amounted to was he was the quintessential corrupt union leader, is how government saw him. You know what group tried to bring him down was the Kennedys. The Kennedys did not like Hoffa, and they were relatively liberal.
well, it's a little different to be the head of a union than to be the head of the union and the mafia.
Perhaps.
Just a little different.
Alright, let's shift our focus for a minute and talk about civil rights in the 1950s, because this is starting the stuff that A, you've heard about, but also is great. And here's why I like the civil rights in the 1950s things. Because all these things you guys have been hearing about, like Eisenhower and Truman and MacArthur, all famous people, right? The civil rights movement is people just like you, especially when we're talking about today. There are people living today that are just part of the civil rights movement. I mean, you could be part of this movement and be an average person and no one know about you. And the civil rights movement is awesome for that perspective. It's literally a movement of just people. But before we can get to that, let's talk about what sets it up. The NAACP had been fighting and winning minor victories here and there, like legally, like getting African Americans into some law schools, desegregating graduate schools. But what was the big prize? Anyone know?
School integration.
Public schools, yeah, public school integration. Well, the civil rights movement did really, really well, because a lot of people are like, we want equality for everything right now. The civil rights movement, the leaders knew that, of course, that was the goal, but how do you achieve that goal? If there's this big, giant dam of segregation, you have to chip it off one block at a time. And one of the biggest blocks was public education, because it provides a pathway to a better life in the future. So they had made some gains, and then in the 1950s, there were several court cases that came around that were challenging Jim Crow segregation in certain cities. This was not, like, you guys have heard about Brown versus Board of Education, right, which we'll talk about, but that wasn't just that case. There were cases in Maryland and all over the country. And they put them together in Brown versus Board. And before the actual last hearing of Brown versus Board came in, the Supreme Court Chief Justice resigned, and Earl Warren was appointed by Eisenhower. Earl Warren was a relatively conservative Republican governor, ex-governor from California. And he was a big supporter of Eisenhower. If you read any of Eisenhower's biographies, there's a lot of mentioning that by him helping Eisenhower, Eisenhower had sort of promised him a position in his government, maybe even the Supreme Court, which is what Warren wanted. So the Chief Justice comes up and he appoints Earl Warren. This will be, Eisenhower will say, his biggest mistake. Liberals will say it was the best thing Eisenhower ever did. Earl Warren, a conservative Republican, ends up being, by far, and it's not close, the most liberal Supreme Court Chief Justice ever. And it's not close. And the only Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, who's more important than Earl Warren is John Marshall, who is, maybe one of the top 5 or 6 most important Americans in terms of legal history, or history in general. So Brown versus Board is heard, and it's clear that they're probably going to strike down school segregation, specifically the South. But Earl Warren wanted something different. How many Supreme Court justices are there?
9.
There are 9. And Warren knew that if it was a 6-3 decision, or even a 7-2 decision, that was different than a unanimous decision. And he literally lobbied and went to every single justice who was on the fence and talked about, this is the moment in history where you have to make a clear right from wrong decision. And on the day that it was announced that the schools were going to be integrated, some of the clerks in the building had sort of found out what was going to be happening, and people who really weren't even that interested in constitutional law started seeping into the Supreme Court. And all the justices kind of walked in, and you have on one side the Supreme Court heard arguments of the NAACP, and their lawyer was a guy named Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was the attorney for the NAACP, who will later become the first ever black Supreme Court justice. And was a great Supreme Court justice until I was almost in high school. I think I was in high school when he retired. And on the other side was an attorney named John Davis. Does anyone remember who John Davis was? Very good, Melanie. He ran for president. And most importantly, FDR was his vice presidential candidate. But he lost. But he was an attorney, and he had argued for segregation for years and years and years. He thought he had it won. And they walk in, and Earl Warren takes this decision, and he starts reading really slowly. And all of a sudden, people start listening to it, and they're like, they might actually integrate schools. And he reads and reads and reads, and finally he comes to a point and he says, therefore this court holds unanimously that we find that segregation of public schools is now and forever will be unconstitutional and not fit. And it gets back to the outside, and people outside the Supreme Court, if you know what the Supreme Court looks like, it's this giant building. You walk in, and not too far in, it's actually the chambers. There's all these steps everywhere outside, it's real pretty, real, sort of Greek looking. And everyone was out there, and it was announced, and it was huge. And in 1954, the biggest one obstacle for the civil rights movement was chipped down. They integrated public schools. So that was 54. Did all the schools in the South integrate in 55?
No.
No. Later they came up with another Supreme Court decision called Brown 2, or Brown versus Board of Education 2. And they said that schools should be integrated with all deliberate speed. What's deliberate mean?
Intentional.
Slow.
Oh.